I'm so grateful that we don't have to do the things that I see other ministries succumb to in order to stay alive, to stay afloat. The antics that I think many people, they just become immune to it. It's as though it's not a big deal. In my studies this week, I thought something really interesting, which I'm sure you will hear me repeat again. But in the example in the New Testament of Ananias and Sapphira, as if you read it again, you read clearly, it says that in the confrontation, why did they let Satan fill their heart to lie about what? It wasn't as though they were doing something outside of the church. It had to do with the offering. And if you think about it, most of the time, most people fall into that trap. Now, luckily, I say luckily for me and for the ushers, we don't have to carry people out like in that day, hopefully. If you don't know the passage, go home and read it in the book of Acts, and you'll understand why I said that. But what I want you to know is that it's always we'll use air quotes here, the religious activity that Satan manages to surfboard on, to manipulate. And so it's why, I think it's another reason why it's vitally important to understand that giving God's way, if it's done God's way, doesn't need the gimmicks and it doesn't need the things of the world. You either understand or you don't. You either have ears to hear or you don't. You're either in the process of being saved, as 1 Corinthians says, or in the process of perishing. And I hate to tell you, it's a terrible place to be in because many times people aren't even aware of the fact that they are perishing, that they're in the process of perishing. Now that should put an alarm into some who are listening, to some hearts that say, well, how do I know that I'm saved? Which begs the age-old question that I thank God, I suffered through many years of going back and forth until one day it was very clear through the scriptures, there's only one way that we're told, and that is to remain faithing, trusting in Christ, looking unto Him who is the author, the architect, and the finisher, the Alpha and the Omega of our faith. Nothing else. And with that connection, it'll take you all the way home. So thank God we don't need gimmicks, and I don't need to stand here and apologize for why we take up an offering and why those people who have the ability to respond, you should be doubly grateful. First, gratitude is your ability to participate, but second of all, that you're able to understand the honor and privilege that I don't have to stand here and engage in apologetics for an hour to tell you why you should feel it the greatest privilege. And maybe you'll go to some other church, some of you new folks, and they'll be busy cowering behind the pulpit, or they'll have somebody else come up to take up the offering because that's just too dirty a thing to share with the saints. But I tell you, it's the highest, or one of the highest forms of worship we can express to God with dignity and nothing to be ashamed of. So ushers, please come. It's offering time. You may be seated. I told you, old-timers know this, but a lot of new-timers don't. People who come and they expect that there'll be different portions of the service. We'll have a traditional service. There's someone who comes up and reads the announcements. I think I did that. In a traditional service, there's the order of things. I kind of did that. In a traditional service, they take up an offering. I did that, and we'll do it again later. But I use the word traditional very carefully. You know, there's a lot in the Bible that if we're not careful to pay attention to, we read with the way we would like it to read. But there's caution against praying, and I've said many times, this house is indeed a house of prayer. I expect you to come here prayed up. I expect you to come in the door. And yes, there's times where we'll actually, you don't know it, but I've had them count me down off the air, and I've told you things and we've prayed together. But I expect you to come here prayed up. The Bible has a lot to say about fasting, praying, and giving. So if you're not sure, especially you new folks, go back and read Matthew 6. It seems like every single church will hear something, will read something, and they put their own twist on it. Now, that's not to say here we do things perfectly, because nobody can do something perfectly when it pertains to the things of God. But we try to be sensitive to those things. I've said to you many times, if I find things that even are different than the things I've said or done, without ego, I will tell you. Because it's not about me, Melissa Scott. It's about you and your faith journey with the Lord from now into eternity. So for those people that thought, well, where's the prayer service? Well, you just had it. All right. Now, with that being said, now I expect you to take it seriously. And in fact, I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I'm stepping away from the book of Revelation and prophecy today. Lord willing, we'll return next week. I want to talk to you today about a familiar subject. In fact, for the people who have been a part of this church for many years, it'll be so familiar, I run the danger of you tuning me out a little bit. I ask you please to be sensitive to the fact, number one, that there are people who will hear this for the first time. Number two, you've never heard it like this before. And third of all, you may find that you've never really made the application to yourself the way I'm going to make it to you and to me today. And you know, the toughest part of putting together a message is how can I bring this to you with your hearts open that God might work the work that only He can do through His Word. So let's go down this pathway today. I'm going to look at what happens when we start to think we can out-know and outdo God. 4 writers of the New Testament talk about Peter and his threefold denial and repentance. No disciple speaks so often as Peter if you study his life. No disciple has the guts, I'm not even sure that guts is the right word, to rebuke Jesus. I don't know. Let's leave that word alone. Jesus spoke to Peter in words of praise and in very sharp words of rebuke. We tend to read our Bible in the King James, and it softens it because of the King's English. I think when I read in the Greek, it's more cutting. The only person to whom Jesus spoke more cuttingly would be to Judas, when he addressed Judas. So you think about it, we tend to think that when people come into the church, and I want you to think of the spiritual leader of any church, which by definition is a church, the church of Jesus Christ, the outcalled ones. Any leader should pattern their dealings with the people that they are under shepherd, trusted with, in the same fashion. Now, Jesus didn't walk around telling every single disciple, good job, that was good, good work, keep up the good work. In fact, a lot of times there was just some harsh words. So I take the things that I have applied to ministry and I try and apply them. Peter, we know, is the impetuous one, but before I begin down a familiar pathway, let me just say he had a keen awareness of something that we tend to not give him credit for. If you comb the things that Peter said, he said a few things that neither you nor I have really wrapped our minds around in our entirety, in our being. When he said, I'm a sinful man, depart from me, I'm a sinful man. I don't think that was false humility. I think that was a true statement of recognizing the greatness of Jesus and his own condition. Now, I'm going to drift in and out because I don't want this to just be a diatribe where I talk and the words don't have a current, present application. It's very easy for us to read the scriptures and read Peter saying, depart from me, I'm a sinful man, and think, oh, that's just a nice saying. But if you think about it, we ourselves, it takes us so long. I'll speak for me first. It took me a long time to understand the sinful nature that is in me. Oh, I'm amazed that he loves me. I'm amazed that he cares. And all my sins are washed away. That does not stop the sinfulness of my nature or of your nature. This is the battle that Galatians talks about, that Romans talks about, this battle between flesh and spirit. They are at war with one another. Another place we have Peter saying when everybody's going to be taking off and leaving Jesus, he says, "Thou hast the words of life. Where shall we go?" Now, I don't know about you, but I can say this as the voice of experience standing here. There are not too many people who understand what the words of life are. I want you to think about that. Just in the circle of people you've encountered who understand the words of life are not, "You're great, you're going to have great success, may you prosper, may every day be a Friday for you." Those are not the words of life. Those are the words of the devil. I hate to tell you that, but those are the words, that's the message of Satan. Unless you think I've become like a church lady or something. I'm just a little bit more intolerant of the message that's being peddled to the masses. So at least with Peter, what I like is that he understood. There was nowhere else to go. Now, how many times have you heard somebody say, "Well, I'm going to come check out your church. I've been standing here preaching the word. I haven't offered you anything else." These are the words of life. And yet there'll be people who will not know they're the words of life, and they'll go, just like the ones who were following Jesus for a time in John 6. And Jesus says, "Will you also go also? Will you too depart?" Hence Peter says, "Where should we go? Thou hast the words of life." So let's give Peter a little bit of credit here. He is courageous and bold at times. And I think in my years of treating many of the texts, I have been very unfair. God forgive me. I've been very unfair in dealing with the text concerning Simon Peter. He is, of course, the one who's walked on more water than any combined body of people in this room, right? And there's a strange paradox with that, even that passage. I went back to re-examine it. There was something very telling about that passage, and I'll tell you what it is. His trade, he's a fisherman. So obviously he knew the waters. When he sees the Lord, he says, "Lord, if it's you, bid me come." And the Lord tells him to come, and he gets up, and he starts to walk, and then he sinks. Now, I give him credit. I've never said this to you before, but it came to me like, wow, I've been really cruel on this guy. He didn't cry out, "Hey, guys in the boat." He was probably much closer to them than he was to the Lord, but he cried out, "Lord, save me." How many of you have gotten out of your comfort zone, letting the stuff of life hit you, and instead of calling out immediately straightway for the Lord, you call, phone a friend, call somebody, use a lifeline that's a friend, somebody you can call to tell them, "You'll never guess what happened to me." I've said this before. That's our tendency. What's even more interesting about this is there's a millisecond where he is fearless. I don't mean fearless as in, wow, that's out there. I mean fearless as in, the Lord said, "Okay, come." And for a millisecond, he did. And just as quickly, that boldness went away, that fearlessness went away, and fear crept in. And before I or you rush to judgment on this man who we're so familiar with, I want you to think about how many times in the midst of a crisis, even though you have had the teaching, you know what to do, fear still creeps in. So don't be slamming too hard on this guy who, by the way, I always say he never gets enough credit for the good things. The perpetual question, still asked today, still being asked today. I've asked it, you've asked it. How many times does somebody sin against you that you ought to forgive them? That came out of Peter's mouth. You know anybody who's asked such a timeless question? I don't. So, we need to be able to say some good things about the man. He seemed to be in tune at some times and very out of tune at others, like the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus just takes these 3 disciples with him. They go up there, and suddenly Moses and Elijah appear, and he says, "Wow, this is amazing. Let's build 3 tabernacles, one for Elijah, one for Moses, and one for you, Jesus. Like everybody's equal here. Let's all hold hands." That's where you got to go. Okay, he was close on the other part, very far off here. I also think that when I think of this man, I think of exactly how he called him and how we tend to put these men, when we read the Bible, we put on funny glasses and we don't see ourselves just like these. Now, forgive me because I've done this before, but let me repeat it because there's going to be somebody new listen to this. Jesus came to these men and simply said, follow me. He didn't ask for them to accept him. He didn't ask if they liked his appearance. He simply called them. They were at work in a familiar place. There was nothing super spiritual going on. I want you and I to come to the place where we're no longer wrestling this out. And I did this for many years because I felt, well, surely if I've come to the Lord, shouldn't there be something else happen, right? How many wrestled with that? Is that it? Nothing else happens? Is that it? Like, did I miss the bus? Am I on the wrong bus going somewhere? Because I've heard about all these experiences that are supposed to happen. But Jesus met Peter and the rest of these that he called right in their everyday life, in the midst of what they were doing. Quit trying to find some spiritual ecstasy in the telling and in the application, because the same way that he found those men is the same way he's finding men and women today. And I can't move past this point of my message without touching on what John says. John says in John 1, he came to his own received him not. But to as many as received him, to those he gave the power to become the sons of God. And it wasn't by the will of men, and it wasn't by blood, if you will. God did the calling to these. It was of God, but by God. I think to myself, especially now with new people who think, well, if she'll do an altar call, I'll answer that call today. I'm not doing an altar call, and I don't do one because I believe the only one who does the altar call is Christ. He's still calling men and women the same way. Now, you may think that it should happen a different way, but this is why this book of these evangelists is so precious. It tells us God's method with man, not man's idea of how God should, but God's method with man, how he comes to us just in everyday life and shows us a pattern, by the way. Now, there'll be people that will say, well, I've heard people use the expression, and I've spoken against this for 10 plus years, of accepting Christ. Very clearly, Jesus, in his own words, in the Gospel of John, in the 6th chapter, and if you want to spin there real quickly so we can say we went somewhere together. In the 6th chapter, in verse 44, Jesus says, no man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him. Now, for you old-timers, that's old news. But for new people listening to me, you're in a state of shock. You mean I don't decide? I know you want to sing the song, I have decided to follow Jesus. I have decided. Well, good for you. It's not like you're going to get a pat on the back from me. What I'm saying is, this is repeated. No man can come to me. I wish I could spend a whole hour just on this. No man can come to me except the Father which hath sent me draw him. I will raise him up at the last day. And then he repeats it again in verse 45. Every man therefore that hath heard and hath learned of the Father cometh unto me. And then he says it one more time in verse 65. Therefore said I unto you that no man can come unto me except it were given unto him of my Father. Does that tell you that there's enough being said about the fact that God does indeed do the choosing? He says it elsewhere. I could find at least a dozen of these references. So the next time a person says to you, when did you accept the Lord? Just smile, because you can. Because the reality is, and this is the reality, this is a hard thing. People grapple with that fine line between what Paul talks about, the things that are predestined, foreordained. Oh boy, here we come. Then bring on the Calvinists and the Arminians, and we can have an arm wrestling match right here. I'm not going there. I'm just saying to you that there's something so very obvious to me in the Scriptures through and through, which is God spoke your name before you were ever here. Now, you have free will, and you have the right to exercise that free will, and then you have the right to turn your back. Like those, he came to his own received him not. Like Peter could have said, hey, I'm busy fishing today. Whoever you are out there, come back tomorrow. Could have been like that. But he knows who are his. And I'm just going to leave that at that. This passage reflects that. So when we are looking at the person, Simon Peter, I want to make sure that you understand that God knew exactly what type of fruitcake he was dealing with when he called him. Okay? And I'm trying to make it so that you can think of yourselves in the same way that Peter was called at the place of his work in everyday life. I want to make sure you understand this is the way God is still coming to men and women today. And this is his dealings with us. And just like this person I'm describing, Simon Peter, God knew. He also foretold of his failure, and he foretold of this in such a clear way. And I guess, if you want to know, my mind was mulling about this. The same mouth that at Caesarea Philippi in Matthew 16 says, "Thou art the Christ." And Jesus says, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed this unto you. But this was revealed to him of the Father." And the same mouth that makes that declaration just a few verses later, if you want to go there, just a few verses later, in Matthew 16, beginning at verse 21, Jesus from that time begins to show unto his disciples how that he must go into Jerusalem. This is after Peter's declaration, "Thou art the Christ." Who do people say that I am? No, I'm asking you, Peter. Who do you say that I am? Thou art the Christ. We read those words and they come out of our mouth very easily, but to those people in that day to say this indeed is the Messiah, the Son of God, the Savior of the world, that was a radical declaration. And from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples how that he must go into Jerusalem, suffer many things of the elders and the chief priests and scribes, be killed, and be raised again the third day. 4 things are disclosed there. You know what? Peter, Simon Peter, there are many of those in this room. You hear half of the message, but you don't hear it all. I don't think Peter was listening when he said that he would be killed, the last part, and be raised again the third day. I don't think he was listening to that, because Peter took him, began to rebuke him, saying, "Be it far from thee, Lord, this shall not be unto thee. Never, heaven forbid." Or, as one translation has it, "Spare thyself." This is the message, by the way, that's preached in churches today. Don't do what Christ said. Don't pick up your cross. Don't make it a pilgrimage. Don't journey. Don't commune with him alone. Let's make it a social gathering. Let's make it pleasant. Let's make it a good, pleasant journey together. I'm telling you, the reason why I'm saying this is because it seems to me as clear as can be a natural, carnal reaction to what Jesus has just said, and Peter's reaction is protect yourself. You know how many people say to me, you should have somebody to take your place in the pulpit. That's what every other pastor does. Well, I don't know. And I met Dr. Scott. He was doing it all by himself. Pop was already promoted. Mom was gone. So I don't know. But for me, I see a danger in that. And I've always said that. I let somebody step in this pulpit one time. Some of you were here. And I was on the platform when it happened. And I swore never again. Because I spent many weeks trying to undo the damage of that, 15 minutes? Now, if you are in my care and I don't care enough to man my post, just like my late husband, if I have to be wheeled in here to do it. But think about this. This carnal reaction is, spare yourself. Take it easy. Kick back. Take a vacay. Right? Not a daycay, a vacay. That's at least 7 on the top of everything else. He says, this shouldn't be. Now, the same mouth that praised Peter, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah," the same mouth says, "Get thee behind me, Satan, thou art an offense unto me. Thou savorest not the things that be of God, but those of men." And this is the problem of many people today coming into the church. They don't understand the things of God. Jesus even says to him, "You don't understand the things of God." Now, be honest here. It's honesty time. How many came into this church? I don't care if you've been here 5 years, 10 years. You came in not understanding the things of God. You came in with a world mindset. You came in from a different church. There you go. And then you sit and you kind of, you get aggravated, you get angry. I went through those emotions until at some point staying in this word makes me realize, no, I did not understand the things of God and God's ways. And of course, Peter didn't either. He didn't want Jesus to die, which was the thing that preeminently Jesus came to do. I want you to think about it. Because it's that part of my brain that said this is something that should be made clear to all. What Peter was essentially saying was, spare yourself. Don't go to die. Don't be killed. This can't happen. We don't want this thing to happen. Essentially, putting a hold on the very thing that Jesus said he had to come and do. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting all of this is to show you no one's immune. And the reason why no one is immune is made perfectly clear. Probably the best passage for us to read this is in Luke 22. You see, Jesus did foretell of Simon Peter's denial. But before he did that in Luke's gospel, in chapter 22 and in verse 31, I want you to read something very carefully with me. The Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. And I want you to put some mental notes there. I taught on this one time. I taught on the second part, which is in verse 32, but I want to pay close attention to something that the Greek revealed very plainly. How Satan hath desired to have you. It's very interesting. The word is in the middle voice. He asked for himself, and essentially he demanded that you be handed over for himself. So when it says Satan hath desired to have you, they italicized it, but really he desired to have him for himself. But there's something more there that's even more incredible. The reason why they had to do this, italics are added by the translators when they run into a little glitch here and there to make it flow. But the you in the original is plural. So when it says Satan desires, he wants you for himself, the you is plural. When he says you as in use, he was talking about plural. He's speaking to Simon Peter, but essentially the you, the pronoun in the plural, covers all of the disciples. It's very interesting. If you are able to read Greek, I encourage you to go look it up. It's a fascinating study, but I can tell you because I do read Greek. The Lord is saying, Satan has demanded to have you for himself, you as in a collective body of disciples, that he may sift you as wheat. And you know that Satan doesn't do anything truly original. So you find if you were looking at Scripture, this is a one-hit wonder, this word to sift in the Greek, but you'll find in Amos 9:9, there's a passage where God says he will sift Israel like corn through a sieve. And in my mind, it becomes very apparent. I'm giving you all the background to say that no one is immune from this sifting. I don't know why it is that we tend to think as Christians and as believers, we come, we hear, we start learning, we learn about spiritual warfare, we learn about what Ephesians 6 talks about, these different hierarchy of evil, fallen evil that rule in the air about us. And don't think for a minute that we will not be sifted as well. Now, G. Campbell Morgan, in his wonderful classic message on Peter, talks about the sifting of Peter. He's got a couple of messages. He talks about the sifting of Peter and makes a very good analysis. It's very brief on what essentially is happening to Peter's character from the time he is called to the time of his denial of Christ, which Christ foretells he will deny him. We'll read about it in the next few verses. Morgan says the great lesson of Peter's denial is that wherever there is an arrested development of the Christian life, there must also follow deterioration of Christian character. And I think so often as people come into the church, it's like people come on staff and they begin to work and they think, well, I'm working for the church. Therefore, it's the same thing as being in the church, and then we start substituting the things that we did when we first came for the things that we're doing, which is exactly what's going to happen here with Peter. Now, my late husband preached a message which we play on the network. We call it VF 166. The orders are you play it once a week, and it plays at 2 different time slots, which is called Peter's Failure and Restoration. And I believe it's in the pulpit number 8, correct? Yes, that's what I said. And what I want to say to you is no matter how many times you have listened to that message, I think what happens is we start to hear things, and sometimes we glean new things if we're really listening, and other times we begin to tune out because we've become so familiar it becomes background noise. The thing that caught my attention is out of the same mouth that said, "Thou art the Christ," said, "Be it far from thee, Lord." Now, in our human way of thinking, we would reverse the matter. We would say, well, when he first met the Lord, he would say, "Spare thyself, be it far from thee," and then say, "Thou art the Christ." But the pattern that's given, I want you to know, this is the pain I have to deal with. That I think people come earnestly desiring to know about God, but when they cannot make it fit into the mold that they envision it ought to be, they become just like this one. Now, I've made mistakes, I've told you. I wouldn't want to follow somebody in a church who can't stand in the pulpit and say, "I've made mistakes, and I've made many mistakes, and thank God the Lord has been gracious to let me stand up again, point in the right direction, and start all over," which is the same message for all of you. No one is higher or lower on this level. We all fall down. We all fall short. But the thing that gets me about this particular thing is that Jesus tells him, Satan desires, he has demanded to have you for himself, to sift you as wheat. And I want you to really get the pictorial image of something being sifted and shaken. Why do you think that wouldn't apply to you? Why do you think, people say, "Oh, you Scott people over there, all you do is talk about the devil." Well, let me tell you, the reason is very simple. The devil doesn't have any dealings with people who are walking in the Christian syrup land of everything's great and the devil's on the bottom of your shoe. And, those people that don't live in the reality that potentially the seeds that have been put out there of God's word are taking root and deep root, and you do become a target. I'd rather stand here and tell you about the fact that you are a target. I can tell you about what to do and how to navigate, but I can't make you earnestly believe that you are. The sifting will happen to every individual, and some will be sifted so much that they fall away. I've seen that. Out of the same man who was rebuked of Jesus, of the same man, he says, don't think it's strange, 1 Peter 4, don't think it's strange when some fiery trial takes over you, like this is something strange. Voice of experience talking. I'll listen to that voice who was already there. And what does Christ say to him? He says, I have prayed for thee that thy faith fail not. I taught on this word before, that your faith be not eclipsed. But I want you to read carefully what Jesus does not say. He doesn't say, I have taken away the danger of sifting. He does not say, I have removed the possibility of you being sifted and the dangers that are lurking. He simply says, I have prayed for your faith to not be eclipsed, to not be blocked out in the midst when you cannot see, when something comes between you and me, which indeed he foretold that he would indeed deny him. And there are many people who will ask the question, well, why didn't he just avoid it? Why does he make us go through these things? Why do we have to be subjected to this? And I'll keep giving you the same answer. If you and I would like to walk in the resurrected life, and if we'd like to use the scripture that says, taste and see that the Lord is good, you will never taste and see that the Lord is good if you've never so much as opened your mouth, and forgive me, but partaken of that heavenly manna. You won't know what that is. And so many people want to tell you, well, this is the way. Not this book here, but my latest book with my picture on the cover and all 24 pictures of me in between will tell you there is no such thing as sifting. There are no dangers. You just go out there and, de-stress, get some exercise, eat well, take my vitamins. In the meantime, the reason why it makes me cringe inside is because there are people who are earnestly desiring to follow hard, press close to God, and then when the sifting occurs, when the eclipsing of their faith occurs, by the way, that's an experience that every single individual will go through. You either go through it sooner or later. You may go through it on multiple levels. Don't think that you are going to be conformed to the image and likeness of Christ by not going through. It says we are partakers of his sufferings, and I think they are microcosms. I know they're microcosms of his suffering. But let's go through this now. Christ tells him, I've prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, that your faith not be eclipsed, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. He even foretold he would deny him, but he would come back, and he would strengthen his brothers. And my biggest complaint to the church at large, and maybe even to this church, how many people have fallen away? They've fallen away from being faithful, they've fallen away from earnestly desiring, and they come back with, it's the guilt issues, like, I really messed up, and I can't even stand myself, but I'm here anyway. Instead of saying, the Lord brought me back, and you begin to strengthen, exactly like Peter, you begin to encourage other people to say, hey, this is part of the trip. I've messed up, you've messed up, and God in his grace, he knows how much we're alike. Too bad that we still are full of pride and guilt and shame, and we still haven't really given the glory to God that he brought us back into the fold. He said unto him, Lord, I'm ready to go with thee both into prison and to death. Now that's a pretty big declaration right there. I'm ready to go with you. I'm ready to die with you. And he says, I tell thee, Peter, the cock shall not crow this day before that thou shalt thrice deny that thou knowest me. Now, an age-old story, but let me just summarize 3 things that I put as mental notes to myself. Essentially, Peter not only shunned the words of Christ regarding his death and resurrection, but he also shunned the words of his prophecy in telling him this thing would happen. He said, no, I know better. I believe that in one of Dr. Scott's messages, he calls this the boastful side of Peter. But I'd call it the boastful side of many Christians. They think they know better than God's word. They think they know better than the master, and they think they know better than the under-shepherd. And I would highly urge you today, especially those people who are listening to me and you know who you are. It's time to think about, is this just a precious little story in the book that you pull out once in a while? Or is this a pattern of what potentially is your life and mine? And I'd prefer to think it's a pattern of potentially what is your life and mine. If you've been called, if God has called you out from among those that he did not call for himself, then 2 things. Yes, there's going to be times when you may think you know better. That's when the flesh, the old man, is kicked back in. And I've seen that too. Like the people who constantly are fumbling around, they never learn. So it's hard for me to look. I don't know which direction to look in because there's a couple of individuals I'm trying not to look at now. But they never learn. The minute something goes wrong, they start walking by sight. Faith has gone out the window. All the lessons, don't doubt in the dark what God showed you in the light. All the precious lessons and promises of God out the window. Oh my God, what do I hold on to? How do I fix this thing? And the more you try and hold on and fix it, the worse it gets. That's probably the thing I see the most. Last, I would say in the lesson, in the order of the lesson here, my late husband had 3 things that he cataloged, beginning with neglect of prayer, substituting action for prayer, and following afar off. Well, let me talk to you about these and let me kind of put them together in a ball so I can move past this. And you can enjoy reading his message and listening to it later this week when it plays. I believe that a lot of times we neglect prayer, and now I'm going to step back from Simon Peter for a second. We begin to neglect prayer when we think we are able somehow. We have a better way. We've got a better method. And I can tell you, I'm not going to lie to you, I've had times in my life where it has been so difficult for me to pray that I've had to make mental notes of things in my Bible that if that day came where it was hard for me to pray, I would at least read this scripture. Well, what do you mean it's hard for you to pray? Some days you feel like God has completely shut your mouth, your mind, and your heart. Ever have a day like that? Oh, well, praise God, I'm not a weirdo. And what happens, it's very easy to succumb to this. Dr. Scott was right. You start acting before you start praying. You start doing the things instead of asking God to do them, to enter into those things. In Peter's case, it's very clear. They went up to pray. Jesus takes 3 of his disciples, tells them to watch and pray, and they all fell asleep. Of course, Simon Peter's the guy who gets it the worst. He gets the earful the worst. Couldn't you watch and pray? Couldn't you stay awake? Couldn't you be alert? Couldn't you just stay with me? And I relate to that a lot of times because I feel like a lot of people, that's the nature of people. They get tired. They get weary. They've got other things to do. It's me. I need my sleep. I can't come in and answer phones because I need sleep. Or whatever your excuse is. I have to go bury my dog, or I have to go milk a cow or something. I don't know. That was gratuitous. So we do that. Peter is another one of these prime examples of, that'll never happen. Now be honest with me. How many people did you hear, how many people did you see that use the words drafted for the duration? Yes, sir, you can count on me. Well, where are they? The duration doesn't mean in my lifetime or his. The duration means until you cross the finish line. Now, think about this, because there's so many of these out there. I'm praying that this will at least reach some who think they're immune to all this. But I'm also talking to some of you to give you the warning, to refresh your memory of how easy it is, these steps backwards. Now, I want to talk about this, what in the first book of Scott is called distant discipleship, because I wouldn't even give it the dignity of that. How many people would like to say they're a part of this ministry, they were a part of this ministry, and yet they are still following afar off? What is the lesson of this whole Bible but mankind's mess up? And to press close to God, He's given you the opportunity. He's given you the ability. He's given you the legs. And if you don't have the legs, He's given you a moving chair. And He hasn't given you the moving chair, He's given you the head. And if He hasn't given you the head, He's given you the eyes. To do something in faith that says, I will press close and I will put my ego under my foot, because that comes from the devil, making me think that I failed so badly, there is no place for me at all. Now, I know who I'm talking to in some cases, because there's people that I know have sent me letters and said they're so sorry. They can't express how sorry they are for what they've done. And there are people in the Bible that I read about who are the other side of it. The prodigal son, just like Peter, the prodigal son, forgot that in that far land he was still spending the father's money, and he was still, even in that far country, he was still in the Father's land in a far country. If you can't get anything else I said, it's like while you're busy being afar off, you're still letting time pass you by. And God probably is saying, I'm waiting. I'm patient. Can you imagine if it was like this? Indulge me. If it really was like this, that God was actually, forgive me, with arms folded, watching you, the ones who are far off, watching you, waiting to see, really, it's taken this long? It's been a month. It's been 6 months. It's been a year. In some cases, it's been 10 years. Wow, this is taking a long time. Remember, there's no time with Him. So maybe He has all the time, because there is no time to keep watching. But as for you, your time is limited. Now, it's like Paul saying, you started good. Who hindered you? You did run well. Who hindered you? Who stopped you from running the race? Can only be one answer, by the way. You can blame it all on the devil. You can say, I succumb. In the sifting of it all, I succumb. And if you've ever been sifted before, you know what I'm talking about. So, okay, some of you can make the big jump, the day of resurrection, and the message that is a special message given, go tell my disciples and Peter. And we all love that because that's a special message to Peter, the one who failed the most, who actually denied, as Jesus said, go tell my disciples and Peter. But you who are out there today are saying, well, that's great for Peter because Jesus gave him a special message, but I haven't gotten a special message from the Lord. He's not saying, go preach the message and go tell this one over here and call this one by name. But you know who you are. And the difference with all this is I think we can reach into this book and recognize that God is still speaking the same way that he was speaking to Simon Peter. Now, the beautiful thing, we call it the condescension of Christ in John 21, where the risen Christ meets Peter and calls him to himself and tells him essentially, he asks him the question, do you love me? And he's asking him that very special Greek word, do you agape me? There's several types of love in the Greek. Agape is the highest unconditional. Phileo is brotherly love. Eros, which is erotic, which is not in the Bible. And stergine, which is familial love. But King James translates it all the same. Love. Do you lovest thou me? Jesus is asking Peter, and he says, but he doesn't use the same word as Christ. He says, you know that I phileo you. You know that I love you. A little lesser love. And this goes on until Jesus comes down to Peter's level and says, using Peter's same word, do you phileo me? Bring it a notch down. Of course, that kind of made Peter a little like, how could you now bring this down? I mean, if you're not ready to bring it up to the Lord's going to bring it down to you. How could you be saying this to me? But at the very end of that passage, Jesus says, when you were younger, you did what you wanted to do. Now, essentially, now that you're older, another one's going to bind you and lead you unto death. And he closes his message to Peter with the same words, follow me, as he did when he started. When he called him to follow him, as when his last words recorded in John's Gospel, follow me. And I often think that sometimes in reading these passages, we will tend to get stuck on the fact that, yes, this man, it depicts for us the grace of God and God's love, and he knows our frame and he knows our frailty, but there's another thing at work here, which is God many times will leave you after sifting to kind of come to your place. We'll call it the prodigal coming to his sanity. In Peter's case, remember, before the Lord appeared, he said, I go fishing. Out there back to doing his own thing again. Sometimes the Lord will leave you for a time, and I don't call it the time out. I call it God saying, it may be time out for you, but not for God who's still watching. And that's the beauty of this. I think to myself, for those people who have failed, and I need you to listen to me because all of the preaching and all of the message could come to a close right now by me saying this. This is the disease we wrestle with often in this ministry, not somebody else's church, this ministry. And I believe it's something that's wrestled with constantly within Christendom. For people who are truly desiring to follow the Lord and fall short so often and start looking at all of their failures and the things that have been so humiliating and so terrible that they can't get back into focusing on the thing that matters, which is Christ. The same Christ that restored Simon Peter, that gave him the charge, that ultimately gave him the license to go and preach the message on the day of Pentecost, is the same Christ speaking to your hearts today. That no matter how badly you've fallen down, it's always the same people in my mind. I think there are some out there who are in the grips of their failure so much that they cannot see the love of God is still working in their lives. That no matter what, you get up today. It doesn't matter about yesterday. Yesterday's failures, by the way, the only thing that will happen with yesterday's failures is Satan will come to remind you of your failures. And the thing that I think, as I said, it took me many years to get over, because there's not some spiritual experience involved, like some of these other people that will tell you have to have this happen and these events must happen. In trusting the Lord, at some point you do cross a hurdle. If he said, you are forgiven, this is what I did at Calvary, it means you are forgiven. It means you get up today and quit looking back at yesterday. Yesterday may leave you, just like Jacob, walking with a limp, the injury of the Lord touching you at the place exactly where you were having it out with him. But don't be mistaken. For that moment in time, where you can just rationalize you're crippled now and you cannot move forward in the things of God, or you can look at it as a moment in time that God used to bring you back to Him. Now, I know there's more than one person I'm talking to today. There's more than 2, there's more than 5, there's more than 20. There's a whole bunch of you. And some of you are so filled with pain because you think there is just no way. You know, you get another chance with God, you get up, you're all gung-ho, it's exactly like this. The action starts kicking in. Let's not talk about the prayer life of a person, because I don't know what you do in your own time. I can only say what I know to be true. This is why when Paul talks about putting on the whole armor of God, he includes the prayer life as well as part of the armor of God. Now, I cannot pick somebody up. The Bible says in the book of Hebrews, the Word should lift up the hands that are feeble, strengthen the legs or the knees that are barely able to move. That essentially in picture type is saying the Word should be able to lift you up today, looking at this example of this individual and seeing the love of Christ. I don't know about you. I don't know if you've gone out and done exactly what Peter's did, and you may rationalize and say, oh, I've done worse. It doesn't matter. The fact that you're listening to me and you know who you are, and you quit making excuses. I love the fact that if I were just looking at Peter's story alone and I closed the book right there, I'd say, well, there's hope for me. And I'll say it for you, there's hope for you, because this is the story of redemption, of God's love. And by the way, if you cannot make an application, you know, as I said, it can be a little homily, and we can just take the homily and we can say, oh, that's a good idea. But when the idea ceases to be an idea and begins to take root as something that has happened in your life, you begin to realize you need these concepts to be able to get back up. Every failure in man's eyes, as long as you get back up with Christ, is a success in His, because He realizes and sees your faith in trusting Him to restore you, just like Simon Peter. That's my message. I'm Pastor Melissa Scott, pastor of Faith Center, Glendale, California. I teach every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. If you'd like to attend services with us, simply call the 800 number, that is 800-338-3030, to join us. If you'd like to watch, listen, and learn 24 hours a day, simply log on to our website at www.pastormelissascott.com.